Okay. Well, hey everybody. Welcome to the Austin Pardot user group meeting. So today we have with us Sarah Kloth, who is, hopefully I get your title right, Sarah, but Vice President of Marketing at Circonte. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, awesome. So with that being said, a couple of topics that we'll be covering today going to be just some brief intro into what Google Analytics is, how Pardot and Google Analytics talk or don't talk, and then some changes that are happening to within Google Analytics, Google in general, the internet, and then obviously Pardot. So with that being said, I'm going to pass it over to Sarah Kloth so she can start her presentation. And then as she presents, if you guys have any questions, feel free to use the chat. This session is being recorded and will be available to all of our friends who registered and couldn't make it because of time zone differences. And so with that, Sarah Kay, go ahead and start, please.
Sounds good. So like Marcos said, my name is Sarah Kloth. I'm the VP of Marketing here over at Circonte. This is, believe it or not, my first user group that I've ever joined, as well as obviously presented at. So I've been in the Pardot space, I want to say 3-4 years, starting off as a user. But before that, I come from agency side, specifically in the search marketing realm. So kind of diving into Pardot and learning out like how conversions interact with Google Analytics, how Google Ads interact with Pardot, is kind of where I started to dive in, and some of the cool things that I want to show you guys here today. Also, Charlie Tucker is, I'm calling him branch security, which I have my door closed, so he will not actually be joining us. But he might be joining a little bit later. We'll see if he comes in. So what Marcos kind of outlined a little bit already, a few things that I want to cover. I want to talk through Google Analytics, the connector, what out of the box exists already with Pardot and Google Analytics, what it is, what it isn't. I want to get into some things that like a basic, getting started with Google Analytics and Pardot, some things on the Google Analytics side that we want to make sure are active. All the things are toggled in the right spot to be able to track visits to landing pages, be able to track form fills properly, and make sure that data passes in the right way. I also want to touch base on just like a recap of UTMs in general, how they work with Google Analytics, and some of the things that we can do to make sure that our naming conventions and what's in place properly translates and correlates into the Google Analytics data that we're seeing to not divide things out. I also want to do a deep dive into some examples of setting up Google Analytics conversions. So I've got a few samples that I want to talk through with you guys about, like if you're using a Pardot form, if you're using a Pardot landing page, if you're using the website and a Pardot form handler, and basically some how-tos and some cool insights how to track those conversions for all those different situations that we come across. I also want to talk about WTF is Google Analytics 4. I think this is a very topical piece right now. Google Analytics 4 has been out for a few years now. I want to say almost 2. There hasn't been a large adoption to it, but Universal Google Analytics is going away. So GA4 is something that we need to prepare for and start thinking now of how to migrate so we can keep all of the tracking that we have. So I'm going to go over some of the basics, what's the difference between the two, and then talk through a migration guide of what we can do kind of starting now so that we prepare for when Universal Analytics is sunset later on. And then, yeah, as Marco said, any questions, hopefully we'll have a lot of time at the end to talk through things, but feel free to jump in the chat and everything as we go along as well. So first, I want to talk through just the Google Analytics connector. That's kind of the basic out-of-the-box function. It's something you just turn on in Pardot, and I think there's a lot of what does this mean when I turn this on? So just wanted to kind of level set with a few things of the Google Analytics connector, what it is, what it isn't. Basically, what this does is it sets you up to be able to use Google Analytics UTM fields on that prospect record. This is first touch only, and basically it's only for after you've toggled that for anyone new coming into the system. So it's not going to go back and populate or anything like that. So what it also isn't is it's also not connected to your specific Google Analytics property. I think there's a lot of confusion around that sometimes where you have a new view or a new property that you're setting up and you think you have to go back into Pardot and reconnect this. And that's not the case. Basically, it's just setting it up to be able to pass in that UTM data from Google Analytics on that first touch into those fields. It also is not multi-touch. It also is not last touch. It's just strictly first touch and first touch only. And like I mentioned, it's not one of the things with the Google Analytics connector, and I think just because of connected campaigns in general, I don't know that this is even used at this point anymore, but I highly recommend there's a little checkbox about automatically creating Pardot campaigns associated in Pardot right away. I really highly recommend unchecking this if you don't already, or if you don't have connected campaign set up and you are utilizing it. Basically, what this does, it can get pretty obnoxious. So if you have this checked, anyone that's using UTMs or any UTM that's out there that is basically viewing your website, Google Analytics is going to capture that data and it's going to pass it into Pardot and create a campaign. So like we're all marketers, and I think we've all at one point done this when we realized what UTMs were at some point. If I'm sharing something out there into the universe, I like to create my own UTMs and just for a kind of fun thing to do. So if I was sharing like today this user group meeting and shared it on my social and it was capturing in Pardot and I named the campaign Sarah Kloth, now you're going to have a Pardot campaign with my name in it. So it can get a little bit crazy and obnoxious if you don't have this or you don't leave this unchecked. So I highly recommend not utilizing that if you are currently. So basically, once you have that done, there's a few things that I always recommend for people to look at inside of Google Analytics to get basically Pardot ready to capture data correctly. So one of the first things is making sure that you have cross or subdomain tracking in place. So a Pardot landing page is basically all off of a subdomain, whether it's go.circante.com or whatever your website is. What we want to do is make sure that we set cookies. There's a setting inside Google Analytics, basically set the cookie domain to auto. This basically makes sure that cookies can be shared across those subdomains and that you're not losing data from a visitor passing from a landing page over to your main website. By default, this is typically already set to auto. The only instance you would have to make sure that this is happening is if you don't use the Google Analytics direct tracking code, but if you're using Google Tag Manager on your site or your Pardot landing pages, and that Google Tag Manager is firing your Google Analytics code, we just need to make sure that this is checked in Google Tag Manager specifically. Another thing that I always get people to set up is looking at the primary domain and making sure that your subdomain and everything is on your referral exclusion list. So this should, again, be set up automatically in your Google Analytics account. So if you're, like I mentioned earlier, if your subdomain or your Pardot is set up to be, your domain is go.circante.com, for an example. Because circante.com is my main website, basically that should automatically be tracked and set to not be a referral. So what I mean about that is when you're in Google Analytics, you can look at the source of where someone comes from. And if someone goes from a Pardot landing page onto your main website, that's going to now get set in referral traffic, where we want that to be set as direct traffic, going easily from one subdomain into your main website. So Basically, by doing this, it makes sure that that's all tracked as one website and they're not looked as two different websites directly. One place you will want to make sure that this is set up is if, for like my example, I have go.circante.com and circante.com is our website. If you're using another domain for Pardot specifically, or you have multiple domains set up in Pardot that don't directly match, if it's something totally different, like for example, we have a go.pardreaming.com. So we would want to make sure that those those other domains that we have are added to this exclusion list. Another big thing is putting in something that's basically called a show full URL filter in Google Analytics. So I think a lot of the times what we see is on the left-hand side is if you're using subdomains for landing pages, it's hard to tell when you're looking at Google Analytics data directly if it was from your website or if it was from a Pardot landing page specifically. And then on top of it, if you use that little window button that's, to be able to click and look to see what that page is, it's going to automatically default to your main domain and not the domain that you're using for Pardot. So it's going to give you 404 errors when you try to go view things easily. So what we can do is we can put a filter inside Google Analytics to basically force it to give you the full domain in that page view, so that you can easily click and see what that page was if you're looking at data. As well, this is really great for reporting. So if you want to take a look at how did my website perform versus how did my Pardot landing pages perform, by doing this, you can easily set reports to look at that full domain URL and divide those out easily. So we'll share this deck as well after, but basically what this is there's filters in Google Analytics inside the admin views, and I have a screenshot here of exactly how to write this to be able to do this. So basically you're just creating a new filter type, a custom filter, and basically you're just saying, here's the host name and the request URI, and basically pull in that data is basically all you need to understand from this. One thing to note is if you do set up this advanced filter to be able to show those, if you have any conversions that are set up by pages, so you might have a goal set up in Google Analytics for a thank you page, you will want to go back and make sure that you are putting in the full domain moving forward, or else that tracking will stop. So this is basically going to pull and put the full website domain in that URL and be able to give you the data that you want to see between Pardot landing pages and your website. The other thing when I look at Google Analytics is I always want to warn people if they're utilizing custom redirects in Pardot. Specifically, if they're using those for things like Google Ads or Facebook ads or anything that naturally has its own tracking. What that can do is if you are using custom redirects, this example specifically for Google Ads has its own tracking to be able to show you what's happening on the Google Ads platform. And then when that user from that Google Ads click onto your website, then Google Analytics is able to keep that visitor and show the data of how they then viewed your website. So when you're using custom redirects for Google Ads specifically, you're basically disabling Google's auto tagging capabilities. And basically what you can see in the screenshot here is that it's giving you the data from the Google ad platform, where you can see how many clicks from the campaign, what your cost was, what your cost per click was. But then when you go to see how those 30,000 visitors did on your website once they did click the ad, you're getting basically all zeros because it's not able to pass that over directly with that custom redirect. So it basically removes the natural, what's called like the G-CLID tracking, which is something specific to Google Analytics or Google Ads, and it just breaks that ad click to website visit. So there are ways around this. If you have to use custom redirects, if you're forcing campaign names or need have a very unique use case to have to use custom redirects with Google Ads. There are different ways you can go about it. There is something in Google Ads basically where you set up what's called a value track parameter, and you can set what those specific parameters are to be able to set this up. It's very intense and a lot of more advanced setup. So I always recommend, if you don't have to use custom redirects, to always let Google Analytics and Google Ads do its natural thing. So a quick overview too of UTMs, just to kind of set like what these are and what they do. So we talked about the Google Analytics connector, basically what it is, what it isn't. It basically allows you to capture all these UTM values, specifically putting them into those Google Analytics fields. So there's basically 5 types of UTM variables. There's your source, your medium, your campaign, your content, and your term. And basically, all this is parameters after your website URL. That's basically being able to tell Google, here is exactly what the campaign source medium is, and pull that in and stamp that within fields, give that data back to Google Analytics. And this is kind of like some examples here that I have for each one, as well as an outline of what that URL string looks like. There's also some tools if you're not familiar with UTMs. Specifically, there's some website pages, Google Analytics, or Google has its own builder. There's also some awesome Chrome plugins that you can use, that if you're on that website, you can open that Chrome plugin, populate your source, medium, all that information that you want, and it basically will spit out that full UTM value for you. One thing again that I want to just warn people of caution on, if you are using one of these builders and you're using it again for any kind of paid accounts, Google Ads, Facebook ads, anything regarding that, be careful not to override any of the auto tagging. Some of these plugins, specifically the Chrome plugins, they will have preset variables for you to use so that it can basically look up and populate what it needs to. So in one of my samples here, like the Facebook ads specific, there's variable sets for the keyword, there's variable sets for the content, and there's variable sets for the campaign, so that it can be smart and pull in all automatically what those are labeled inside of Facebook without you overriding them. One thing too, when people are starting out just using UTMs and how this flows into Google Analytics again, is I really steer them on setting a naming convention before they start. If you use caps, if you use dashes, those are all looked at totally different in Google Analytics when that data comes back in. So if someone's typing in, let's say the medium is social and the source is Twitter. If someone says Twitter-organic or Twitter-ad or Facebook with a capital F and not a capital F, all of that basically it can't be combined into Google Analytics. It's going to look like its own source, its own medium specifically. So by setting a naming convention, you can make sure that every effort across your org, they're all using the same naming, so you can look into Google Analytics easy and be able to group what you need for reporting and take a look at it too. I also tell people when they're starting these out to look at how Google Analytics currently names source and medium, so that they can adapt their naming convention to that natural format that it already is picking up. So if something's being called, again, LinkedIn versus linked-in or social, or instead of paid, some people call medium paid versus CPC. So just take a look at what is there and take a look at your data, what campaigns you have run in the past, and come up with a nice naming convention so that you don't have to basically segment or separate all your data moving forward. So once you have that, basically the question I always get is, how does Google know? How does it know that it's there? Um, so basically what it is, again, it's a URL. Someone's going to land on your site. They're going to load that URL. Google's going to, if they have the tracking code on your website or your landing page, they're going to be able to read that data. So that data will be passed as a visitor in Google Analytics, and it'll show the values for each that campaign, where that visitor came from, the source, the medium, etc. But then one of the big pieces is being able to pull these in on the actual form fill. So what we want to do to be able to do that is you need to make sure that the code is on your landing page, specifically, whether that's your own website or a Pardot landing page. And then you want to make sure that you have hidden fields on your form so that those values can pass and populate there. And then if your form is iframed, let's say you have a Pardot form that you're utilizing and you're putting it on a website page. Basically, that form is its own website. So now what you're looking at kind of two websites. You need to make sure that data can basically talk from one website to the other. So someone will land on your website and then we'll be creating a script that'll basically pull those UTM fields and talk to the second website, which is your form, and be able to pull those UTMs out of the URL and into the form hidden fields so that they can be populated when the form is submitted and then stamp that on the prospect record. So how do you do that? One of the things I always recommend, going back to what the Google Analytics connector is and isn't, it's only first touch. So if you want to get very specific on what your campaign is doing, not just on new prospects, but your current existing accounts and prospects, what I always recommend is setting up new UTM fields beyond that. So depending on what type of tracking you want, if you want to look at first touch, last touch, look at all the touches, you can set up a bunch of different UTM custom fields. But basically this one example I have is looking at just a current. So it's just going to basically stamp the most recent value of what someone came from when they filled out the form. So like I mentioned, it's basically adding new hidden fields on your form in Pardot. Make sure that they're text format, they're hidden. And then one of the biggest things, or two of the biggest things to make sure when you're setting these up, is in the advanced tab when you're setting up your field, is to make sure it's always displayed, even if it's previously completed, to make sure that it can get filled out with the right data. Because if someone's coming to one of your landing pages and they fill out a form and then a week later they interact with another email or campaign you have and fill out a form, if that's not checked, basically it's not going to stamp the new value. Another thing is to not make these fields required. If someone comes to one of your pages and there isn't a UTM value and it's not getting pulled in there, it's going to throw errors. So just make sure that it's not required and then it's always displayed no matter what. So then basically, how does that get populated? So in your landing page template, basically what you're going to need to do is the code. Again, we will share this deck to be able to tell Google, hey, someone just landed on this page. We have these hidden fields that exist over here, and we want them populated with the UTMs in the URL. So basically that code just basically reads the UTM parameters and then writes them into those hidden fields. So this is kind of a base code, just looking at the current source, medium, and campaign. It's pretty self-explanatory when you start looking at that code, and you can kind of mimic it if you need to add additional fields, if you want to look at content or keywords, or you want to look at not just current, but you want to look at first and last. You can basically take this script and add additional fields that you need specifically to make this script work. So basically that is UTMs and how to set naming conventions, how to grab that data, and how to stamp it in into Pardot specifically. So then what do we want to do to then tell Google that this form just got filled out on a landing page? And how do we set that as a goal in Google Analytics? So I've basically outlined a few different scenarios here for all the different use cases of forms that I've seen a lot of Pardot users utilizing. Basically, is it a Pardot form that you have on a Pardot landing page? Is when the form is complete, is it a thank you content that displays? Is the user being directed to a specific thank you page? Is the landing page your website and it's a Pardot form embedded as an iframe? Is the form a Pardot form handler on your main website? So I want to take a look at a few of these scenarios and talk through some of the things of how I set these up to track that you guys can just kind of take away and utilize as a nice quick guide. So the first one that I want to talk through is if you have a Pardot form and you're using a Pardot landing page. And from that Pardot landing page, when someone fills out that form, instead of using the thank you content, you're directing them again to a thank you page specifically for that campaign. This is the most easy way to be able to set up Google Analytics goals. All you're going to need is a Google Analytics account. You're going to need to make sure your Google Analytics tracking code is on your landing page. You can easily find that in Google Analytics, going to admin, going into your view settings and finding the tracking code under your property specifically. And then you just want to make sure that that Google Analytics tracking code then is on your thank you page. So basically what we want to do, we would add that Google Analytics tracking code, again, navigating to Google Analytics admin property settings and grabbing that code. It's going to be the G-tag script code that you're going to be copying. And then in Pardot, you're going to navigate layout template. Basically, you're going to put that code in at the opening head tag. So I have two kind of screenshots here to show you exactly what that code is and where that placement looks. So once you have that code on your page, on your landing page, your thank you page, it needs to kind of be in both. You're going to go to Google Analytics and you're going to set up your conversion. So when you navigate in Google Analytics, you're going to go to admin, view settings specifically, and then goals. The goal type that you're going to want to create and set up is going to be custom. And the type you want is going to be destination. So basically that's just going to say, anytime someone lands on page X, say that this is a goal that was completed. So basically you would take the URL of your thank you page that you're directing people to and paste that directly into the destination field there. If you have other specific things you want to track, if you have values that you want to put towards goals, you can also set values in here as well. And then another thing is a funnel. So if you're using the same landing page or thank you page for a lot of your different campaigns, and they're all going to go.pardot.com/thank you, you're going to need to set up a funnel as well and say, this is a goal specific for campaign A. This is the thank you page that we wanted to trigger on, but we want to make sure that the page that they viewed before that was page A, so that you can attribute it specifically to that. Google Analytics also has this verify the goal option before you save it and set it up. And it will tell you, based on the data that it was able to track, it'll tell you what your conversion rate would have been and how many goals you would have had since. So it's a good way to track it and to see if it's working right, see if you have the data incorrectly. But that is basically the easy way to do this. And one thing to note on this as well, if you do use the show full URL filter that I talked about earlier, instead of where it's going to give you an example of where the destination is, it's going to say example/page A. You want to make sure that you have your full domain in there. So if the thank you page is a Pardot landing page, it could be go.pardot.com/page A. Otherwise, it's not going to be able to track that activity correctly. So that's the easiest way. You've got a thank you page, and all you need basically is the URL of that thank you page to set up that goal analytics. The other side is, okay, I don't have a thank you page. I'm just using the thank you content. So how can I do this to be able to say someone filled out that form and it populated correctly, there were no errors on the form, and they got that thank you content? So kind of the same way, it's still easy, but it's a little bit more involved. Basically, what you're going to need is a Google Analytics account again, Google Analytics tracking code on your Pardot landing page specifically. And then two new things is you're going to need a Google Tag Manager account, and you're going to need the Google tracking code in your form specifically as well. So basically what we're going to use is in that thank you page, what I like to do here. So there's a few different ways to do this. Sometimes people want to create a event using Google Tag Manager to just say, if this button is pressed, count it as a conversion. There's a lot of data discrepancies that I see when we do that. There's no validation that the form was filled out correctly. There's no mitigation of spam if a bot is coming and crawling that page and just clicking that button. So what I like to do is create what's called like a hidden or a spoof page when someone sees the thank you content. So what I do is inside of Pardot, in the thank you content section directly, you can add a hidden div. So you would just create a div with an ID with whatever you want to name it and put it underneath the content that you're actually displaying to users in that thank you code section. So for this example, I have div ID equals think-u, and it's empty. No one's going to see anything there. The user's not going to see anything there. The only person that's going to be able to read this is Google or Tag Manager specifically, and they're going to see that that div ID exists, and then they're going to be able to track and fire activity against that. So we're going to be adding that div to start in the thank you message in the code section. And then we want to also add this into the thank you in the thank you code specifically, not the thank you content section. You're going to want to put in your Google Analytics tracking in that section specifically too. So once you have that, you're going to go to Tag Manager. If you don't have Tag Manager, it's a free tool with Google. Super easy to use now. It's very user-friendly. Before you had to know code to set up events and how to fire things. And now it's pretty user-friendly and straightforward. But I've got a lot of steps kind of outlined here for you that you can easily follow and know exactly what to toggle and what to click. So what we want to do first in Tag Manager is we want to set up what's called a trigger. So the trigger is basically saying exactly that. When do you want something to fire? So we're going to trigger something on what's called element visibility. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to say, hey, anytime the element of ID thank you is visible on the page, then we're going to fire this trigger. So there's something inside of Google Tag Manager just called element visibility that you're going to select, and you're going to select the selection method as ID, and the element ID is you're going to name it whatever you put in that thank you content. So for our example, it was think-u. And then where do you want it to fire? You want it to fire once per page. You don't want it to keep firing. Otherwise, you're going to be tracking and logging more than one conversion per page. So basically, we're asking it to fire every time it sees that hidden code, right? So then what we want to do is, again, in Google Tag Manager, then we have to set up what's called a tag. So we're going to create like a virtual page view. So we don't have a thank you page, but we're going to basically fire one, and we're going to say, when someone sees that thank you code, let's call it a page, and it's going to be basically this spoof page to Google Analytics. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up a tag for a page view, and we are going to set it to basically name it. We're going to name the page what we want it, and we're going to call it, I think in this example, it's Pardot form virtual thank you that I have as the URL, and the title of the page is going to be, again, Pardot form virtual thank you. So all this is doing is basically, once that previous trigger happens, Google Tag Manager is like, okay, yes, I saw the content in the thank you section. I've seen ID thank you. And then what this is doing is then saying, okay, you saw it. Well, then let's say a visitor landed on this page URL specifically. So if someone came in and landed on Pardot form thank you. So once we have that fake page, basically, that we just told Google that existed, that doesn't actually exist, we can go back to Google Analytics and we can easily create a goal for it the same way that we did with a thank you page. So we can just take that, whatever we called it, that URL. So for this example, it was Pardot form virtual thank you. And again, say this is the goal. Every time someone lands on this page, track it as a conversion. And that's a cool way to do it without having to try and do it by button clicks or trying to validate forms to make sure that we get the right type of data coming in, and it's not spam, it's not accidental clicks, it's not errors that are counting twice. But this guarantees that someone actually filled out the form, saw the thank you content specifically, and then fired this virtual page. So then how does this process differ from other scenarios? So I want to also look at how would this differ if someone used a Pardot form on their website with thank you content, with thank you page, and then also how would this differ if someone is not using Pardot forms, but they're using Pardot form handlers on their main website with either thank you content or thank you pages. So first looking at Pardot forms. So if you're iframing these on your current website and you're using thank you content, basically what's different is that form is now iframed on the page. So you would still follow the same concept, but you would need to make sure that you have a script basically that can talk from one website to the other website. So again, going back to the script I mentioned earlier with the UTMs and being able to pass the UTM from your website into the Pardot hidden fields, it's the same concept where we need to make sure that each one of those, that website and website/form, can talk to each other and be able to pass that value over. If you're using this with a thank you page, what's different? Really nothing. Everything here, again, you're just directing them to a straight thank you page. So the only thing that you would have to keep an eye out for is, again, if your thank you page is used by, it's not like truly unique, and you're using that same thank you page for all of your different campaigns, then you just need to make sure that you have, again, that filter set up to say page, the first page they visited was campaign A, and then they came to the thank you page directly. So you can get that goal set directly for that one campaign. If you're using Pardot form handlers, specifically on your main website, either it's thank you content or thank you page, again, looking at what's different. If it's thank you content, it's even simpler. There's no more iframe to worry about. So basically, all you have to worry is that you have Google Tag Manager code on your website. It doesn't have to be in the specific form anymore. It just has to be on your website, and that should be across the board to begin with. So that gets even simpler using the Pardot form handler. And then if you're using Pardot form handlers on your main page and you have a thank you page instead of thank you content, again, nothing is different. All you have to do, again, is make sure that that page is unique for the Google Analytics filter if you're using more than one thank you page. So that is Google Analytics and kind of the basics of getting things tracking properly from Pardot that we're using into Google Analytics and setting everything up correctly so that we can pass data how we need to. The one caveat that is coming up that I'm sure a lot of you have heard about is Google Analytics 4. So like I mentioned earlier, Google Analytics 4 has been around, I want to say about 2 years now. There hasn't been a lot of adoption to it just because the data is so new, and I'm going to show you some of the differences from Universal Analytics and GA4 and talk about what you can do to start switching and navigating to that and how they differ. So the first thing is, what is the difference? So Universal Analytics today is all about the page view. It's all about one visitor coming to one page and clicking across from page A to page B to page C. And along their way, they might trigger an event, whether they download a PDF or they fill out a form or they watch a video. Google Analytics 4 is going away from that user and that page view concept and is more about engagement and events. So it's not looking at someone going to page A to page B. It's looking at the events and the activities specifically that they're taking to show engagement. So this is a quick snapshot of Google Analytics 4 and what the whole new menu looks like. So before we had audiences, and we could see our audience data. We could see our page data and behaviors. We could see our acquisition data. We could divide by channels. This is a whole new layout where it's basically filtered in by acquisitions now and engagement, and specifically driven across events. So this is a snapshot of like out of the box events when you first set up Google Analytics 4. And again, you can notice that it's not page driven, but it's more user engagement driven. So you still have your page view, and you can click into page view and narrow down exactly what pages are visited. So that's not going away, but they're trying to get us to think differently about analytics, and not be so focused on page visits, bounce rates, time on site, and be more specific to the user behavior and engagement. So out of the box, it's actually super smart. Some of the things that they can do, you're looking at scroll depth that we're going to be able to get data on. We're looking at user engagement, so looking to see, who's actually coming that's engaged. They're taking some action, or they're staying on the site a certain amount of times, whatever that filter is to define engagement. It's looking at, again, page views still, clicks, file downloads, all kinds of stuff right out of the box that we would have to set up normally with Universal Analytics. So a totally new way of thinking about it, a totally new way of how you're going to have to start handling Google Analytics reporting, to be able to have a totally different mindset about your users and how to judge performance. So some of the things that kind of carry directly one-to-one when you're looking at the data sources. When you look at Google Analytics Universal, you had users, now you have total users, new users, or new users. A lot of the things here just are counted differently, or called some things differently, or slightly different. But there's two things at the bottom here that don't directly correlate, that Google Analytics 4 is basically trying to get away and basically kill these type of metrics. And I'm kind of glad that they are, because they're two things that I think a lot of people focus on and they don't totally understand. So one is average session duration, they're basically killing, and then two, bounce rate. And bounce rate, I'm so glad that they're killing. A lot of people focus in on this and they don't truly know what it means. But if someone's landing on your website currently and they have a landing page and they got the information that they wanted from that landing page and they left, that's a negative aspect and was showing a high bounce rate. And people normally, would get fixated on that, which it's not always a terrible thing. So they're moving away from bounce rate and going more towards engagement to try and define, is someone engaged with your content or not, versus do they just view one page and dip. So two different data points that they're kind of moving away from and redefining what that looks like. On the acquisition and behavior side, some easy things here, just what they're calling things. It's basically the same. They're just renaming it from campaign medium source to session campaign, session medium. Again, focusing on the session and not the individual a little bit more. And then on the behavior side, one of the things, or two of the big things to call out here, is page views and screen views. They're looking at a way to, in the page title screen name, they're looking at a way to connect not just your website data, but then also if you have data streams for apps or anything beyond your website, to be able to bring that into one total view. So if you have an app for anything that you're utilizing, you can now combine that data with your normal website page view data. Another thing is the big thing that's going away that I think a lot of people are going to have to adapt when it comes to Google Analytics reporting is the events and how those are labeled currently. So when you have an event that triggers, let's say it's a button click or a PDF download, you're able to title those as like, what is the category? What was the action? What is the label? So let's say it was a PDF. You can say it was category, sales brochure, action, download, and label could be the title of the PDF that was downloaded. All of that's going away now, and it's just going to be able to be filtered by the event name, which isn't terrible. It's just a new way of thinking when you're putting reports together, because now we have custom dimensions within those events that we can specifically set up events per PDF download, that we don't have to be able to look at category, action, label anymore. So again, it's just a whole nother way of how we're looking and parsing data to be able to figure out what's happening on the site and what our users are, engaged with. So one of the big things that's coming is universal analytics is basically no longer. It is not totally dead yet, but beginning July of next year, it will no longer be populating data. So basically, anytime you log into Google Analytics now, you're going to get these big warning signs that basically say, hey, it's time to switch over to Google Analytics 4. And when you now go in and create a new property or a new view, you no longer have the option. By default, you have to toggle on universal analytics if you want to create a new one. And it basically gives you this big warning saying that, yes, we'll let you still create this. But again, by July of next year, it's going to be retired. So what does that mean? So like I mentioned, July next year, it's going to stop collecting data. After that time, you will still be able to access the data in Universal Analytics, but only for 6 months. So they recommend that they're going to be able to allow you to export your data out so that you have it as backups and you have it so that you can keep it for any historical needs that you have. And then if you are a paid Google Analytics 360 user, they're giving you an extension to October to be able to move and migrate all of that data over. And then after that, basically, they're going to start cutting off any Universal Analytics APIs and basically start shutting all of that down and officially sunset Universal Analytics. So basically, what's new? What are we excited about? And what are we kind of scared about? So the big move to Google Analytics 4 is it's privacy focused. You can kind of see where they're moving away from the individual page view and they're focusing more on engagement as a whole. So it's privacy focused and it's going to be designed to work both with and without cookies. So that's a big thing moving forward. I think everybody's heard about cookies in the past and some of the news recently about Google Analytics specifically and GDPR compliance. So basically, it's future proof. It's basically built to be able to handle what's to come. They also have some new machine learning, some AI going on in GA4 that's going to be able to better walk through the customer journey across platforms, devices, etc. I don't know what this is going to look like just yet, but basically they're saying that they're going to be able to fill in gaps where previously you couldn't see and make things easier to track utilizing their first party cookie that they're creating with GA4. One of the things that I am really excited about is better audience segmentation. And I can pop into Google Analytics here in a second and show you some of the really cool stuff that you can do with advanced audience segmentation now with GA4. But basically you can say, okay, I'm looking at my Google Analytics account and I want to look at a specific user or a specific segment and filter all of my analytics by that segment. So if I want to say, show me everybody who first visited my website from my social media campaign for my product launch, I can do that. And I can see exactly who came in, not just from that, but then how does that audience continue to grow over the next year as we populate data. So it's really cool. Some of the things you're going to be able to break down, not just by sources and campaigns. You can also do it by demographics, age groups, all kinds of really cool stuff to build out segmentations. So what looks different is the data, like I already kind of mentioned a little bit, but they're basically pulling some of our deep dive stats. So being the more SEO geek that I am, this brings flashbacks to when they originally took away our keyword or organic keyword data and moved everything to not set. So basically, they're taking away a lot of that from a privacy standpoint. It makes sense, but it's going to be a totally different way of how we look at data moving forward. One of the biggest things we're seeing is you're going to have to rethink reporting. You're going to have to look at different metrics. You're not going to get the same one-to-one aspects that you are anymore. You're going to have to adapt your events, how you're tracking those currently. If you use category action label to segment, and be able to just totally do a revamp of your reporting. Another thing too is you're going to have to rethink your property and view structure. So if you're not totally familiar with Google Analytics, and what that means is basically you have a Google Analytics account, it's account A, and then you have properties for different websites, properties for, some people look at it from, let's say you have a German website or you have a US website. Those are typically set as different properties. And then in those properties, you have views. So inside of the US website property, you would have a view for, let's say, raw data. And then you'd have a view for filtered data. Some people set up views specifically for anyone coming from Salesforce or anyone coming in their current prospects that they want to filter out. Now, a big change with this is you used to be able to set goals on that view, that very drilled down aspect. Now you're going to have to set goals at the property level as a whole, and they're only giving us 30. So if you have a bunch of different view sets with different filters and different views that you're setting up per property, and you've got a bunch of goals in there, one of the big things is you're going to have to rethink those goals and how you need to structure those to make sure that it makes sense to have those goals across all your views, as well as you're focusing on what is a goal that's most important, knowing that you only have 30 available to utilize. So yeah, those are kind of the differences of what's to come, some of the exciting, and then what are some of the things that we're going to have to look at. So how do we start preparing, knowing that, okay, yeah, we have a full, year plus. I think we've got 14 months before this officially leaves. One thing I think we have to look at is if we want one-to-one year-over-year comparison, we need to set up a Google Analytics for property in the next 2 months so that when July 1st of next year comes around, we have that full year starting July to look backwards on data. Otherwise, we're going to run into situations where we can't easily compare to last year and get all the data that we need for reporting. So some of the things that we can do now in these next 2 months to make sure that we can simultaneously run Universal Analytics and Google Analytics for the next year together is mapping out our property and view structure, taking a look at what you have in the account now, remapping out what that needs to be, setting up a new Google Analytics property, pretty easy to just go in and do. You want to make sure that you set up any data streams now. So basically, this is just looking at any website properties to start tracking. Again, any apps if you have those. For the most part, I think a lot of people just have a website, a main website that they need to set up a data stream for, and that's pretty simple and straightforward. You also want to add the data collection. So this is just making sure that you have the new tracking codes on the new websites, whether it's a one-to-one, adding that script to your website directly, any Pardot landing pages that you have, or that's creating a GA4 container specifically inside of Google Tag Manager. And then also you want to activate your Google Signals, which basically this is just advanced tracking that you want to turn on in GA4, so we have it right off the bat. It's going to be able to create remarketing lists. It's going to be able to create and grab demographic information, all kinds of really cool stuff there that I think is what they're building all of this more advanced machine learning on. So definitely something you want to make sure that's activated and starts gathering information. And once you have your Google Analytics for property set up and all these things ready to track, also if you're running any Google Ads accounts, you want to make sure to link that Google Ad account directly to that new property. That'll get you started. That'll get you collecting data so that you are ready for that switch to have a full year comparison when it comes to next year. Some of the other things that you can start migrating once you have that original setup is looking to map over your events from Google Universal Analytics to GA4. So looking at, again, by the property setting, how many goals and what kind of events we want to trigger, and then which of those events should be goals specifically. We also want to migrate over any custom audiences if you have those set up, specifically remarketing lists that you might be utilizing with Google Ads. If you have any e-commerce data, this would be the time to migrate all of that over as well. Make sure that you're still being able to track all of that e-commerce rich data that you have. And then when you're ready to make the full switch, migrating over any users and permissions that you might need. And there's a link here that I have specifically to Google's migration plan too, and they walk you through each one of these steps basically. And that is Google Analytics 4. And that is all I have. So please ask questions.
I have a few here that I am sure people at home will, or when they're watching this recording, will have. So I think I have like 2 or 3 questions, but I'll try not to monopolize all the time. So the first question is, right now, take us out of doubts here, Sarah Kay. If I have a website like tracking script from Pardot, and then I also have Google Analytics, I think you mentioned it earlier, but number one, do I need to have both scripts on my landing pages and forms that I embed on my website? So that's number one. And then number two, why do my numbers look different between Pardot and Google Analytics when it comes to page views currently? So you shared a lot about future tense and how should we prepare for like today, for the rest of the year. We had some KPIs that we had in mind, right? Back in December or January that we were aiming for. So how do I end the year, and what data source I guess is the most reliable? Should I look at Pardot or should I look at Google Analytics?
Yeah. So basically, the Pardot tracking code is basically something to put on your website specifically that will bring over tracking into Pardot for their cookie specifically. When we look at tracking for kind of what I've talked through with tracking code on landing pages for form fills, etc., if you're using a Pardot landing page, that the tracking is already, I believe, naturally there, and you just need to add in the Google Analytics specific tracking code to be able to track that. But then, yes, if it's on the website, you want both the Google Analytics script and your Pardot tracking code on your website specifically. And your second question, data discrepancies between Pardot and Google Analytics. I get this question a lot, and I think they basically are tracking things differently. And I never remember the correct terminology here, but things can track differently based on like how they're grabbing that data. So it's like server-side tracking, or it's like cookie-based tracking. So there's always going to be discrepancies. I always lean towards Google Analytics specifically, just to know that they are very good at distinguishing duplicates and true users. They've got a lot of spam filtering, etc. So I always kind of default to that if we're looking at data regarding page views or obviously form fills. You can see that directly more in Pardot of who actually filled out said form than Google Analytics. So I guess it depends on what you're looking at, but there's always going to be discrepancies.
Got it. I have 2 more. Sorry. I'm making sure that I cover some bases for some of our people. So, in the first half of the presentation, you kind of, I mean, even for somebody that has been using Pardot, it could be like, a light bulb moment, because it's like, oh, I didn't know that there was more to just like making sure that Google Analytics was enabled, and like that the first party or the first touch tracking was there, right? A lot of people think that that's it. So, thank you for sharing that. Now, as you talk about the second half of your presentation, where like um, we're moving away from like global analytics to like this like Google Analytics 4. Um, when you cover what you cover on the first half, like talking about like having hidden fields and like UTMs or potentially using the Google Click ID or whichever path people decide to go to. Do you anticipate any major changes to that current setup for those pieces that people should start like looking at, or could they use kind of like that framework that you outlined initially in the first half of the presentation, and would that still be more or less future proof, and it's more of like the uh, more of the events and goals that you have for the actual website versus like how people are converting?
Yeah, so it's definitely going to be a little bit different as far as like the screenshots that I had from earlier. If you're using it directly in Google Analytics, the goal view is a little bit different setup with GA4. If you're using Google Tag Manager, though, that's kind of future proof and foolproof there. You're going to be able to set up those, again, hidden page views on the content, and all of that should be able to still fire and populate that page view. The only thing is different is the way goals are set up in GA4 now is all about events. So instead of just saying, go to this destination, you're creating an event that says someone viewed this page.
Right.
So the same concept is there. It's just a little bit as far as like the screenshots that I've used in the direct clicks might be a little bit different, but the same process is going to apply.
I'm going to open it up to the other people on the team, but if somebody who's watching this would be interested in like somebody walking them through how to migrate some of this data, or honestly just getting started because they didn't even know this was possible, um, is I know you put a migration plan link from Google there as I'm sure a great resource. Um, does Sercante do some of that as well, or would they like what kind of agency or type of company would they be looking for to support them in that type of initiative?
Yeah. We definitely do that at Sercante. And we've also worked with others who have agencies in place. So if you say, hey, we need someone to fully tackle this, we can do that over at Sercante. Or if you say, hey, I've got a few questions, I can answer that. Or we have a digital marketing agency specifically, and we want you guys to guide them or help with that migration. We've also done that. But yeah, it's definitely something to start migrating, looking at, create a documentation guide basically for your views, your properties, your events, and your goals that you want is going to be the key piece to start with.
Got it. Thank you for that.
Mhm.
Michelle, Laura, members of the audience, do you guys have questions for Sarah while you have her?
I have a question. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yep.
Hi. With the setup of the current UTM campaign, current source, once we get people in with those values, Pardot doesn't have a great way to report on that. And so passing it into Salesforce, how do you recommend feeding that in, especially if people have multiple UTMs tracked on their prospect, if they've done multiple form fills that capture those? What do you recommend for reporting on that?
Yeah, definitely pulling that into Salesforce within those fields. I've seen some clients in the past that they want to capture the current, the most recent. They want to capture the first, and they want to capture the MQL direct campaign. So if they've got like scoring and grading set up, or a lead qualification set up that says, if someone filled out this form at this point, then yes, they're a lead, pass them into Salesforce. I've seen it where they've basically set it up to, on the Salesforce side, when someone comes through that way, to be able to stamp what that value was directly into an MQL source or UTM source, medium, etc. field, to then be able to see all of that. So I've seen it set up a few different ways that people are just stamping, and then they also use Salesforce to be able to log like history of that field and be able to see that. But it's definitely on the Salesforce side when it comes to reporting on those items. Looking at that directly in Pardot, I think is a little bit hard.
Yeah. Do you advise that on the lead record, or should we use a campaign member record for stamping that?
Yeah, I've seen it done both ways again.
Yeah.
I've seen it where based on what that campaign is, they've got rules set to match what the name of the Salesforce campaign is. And then I've seen it also where it pulls from the lead record to the contact record or whatever it needs to do there and be able to stamp that. I think the most common and easiest is just to look at that on the lead record and to pull reports on that lead record specifically.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you.
Mhm.
I'd like to add to that. So, Megan, thanks for your question. So I think it was the San Francisco Pardot user group that hosted Jenna Mobley a couple of months ago. And they actually, she either has a blog post or there's, I'm sure, a recording that we can help you find if you connect with one of us, maybe on Twitter or LinkedIn after this. But they went over that scenario, but for like adding it straight to the Salesforce campaign, right? And they talked about their setup and how like they could push it there. To me, from a consulting perspective, that I mean, it makes sense, but it also seemed like really like not convoluted, but just like a long way to get to where you want it to be at the end of the day. So what I see most people, at least initially starting, is having it both on leads and contacts, because a lot of times um, when you start doing this, you will probably already had Pardot or some sort of other marketing automation tool, and so you already have people in there. So just defining it, do I just want to touch leads and that's it? Or do I want to kind of do both and then do kind of what Sarah Kay mentioned, like the first touch, last touch, and like whatever's in between for the MQL stamping. But that's usually what I see, and that tends to be I think it really depends on kind of like what you're trying to like reach for, right? So some people just want to see like quarter to quarter which were like our channels or mediums or campaigns, right? That were just converting the most. And for things like that, I find that perhaps just having it on the lead or the contact record tends to be a little bit easier, but it ultimately just depends on what you're trying to collect, and then we work backwards from there.
Okay, great. Yeah, that would be super helpful to get that resource.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Michelle, do you have any questions for Sarah?
I don't think I do. I think she did great at explaining, and it's great information no matter how much knowledge you yourself have on Google Analytics.
Sorry, I called you out because sometimes you have some really cool meaty questions when you're down in the weeds. So I just figured.
Yeah, the one thing that might come to mind that still kind of relates to these UTM parameters and mapping it to either like your campaign members or leads or contacts, I always, in my own mind and in conversations with team members, get in debates on how granular or not you should be in certain situations. And so my mind already debates the source of the person to your company, so your lead source, and it could be how they were sourced to that specific marketing campaign that you're coming to, as well as not just that first touch source of how they came to you, but their source for coming to that marketing campaign. And so I say that in the sense of there's also the debate of, do you create separate Salesforce campaigns for one initiative that shows here's us doing an email, here's us doing an ad around it? Or do you have one Salesforce campaign that then has either UTM parameters on the campaign members or the campaign member statuses to track some of this sourcing? So I always like to see what other people's ideas and concepts are around source as a whole and those different types of meanings and ideas behind how they pull that through, whether it's these UTMs causing a lot of that or beyond.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I always try to keep it simple. You know, it's always going back to everybody wants something so granular sometimes, and it's like if we can answer the question of what do you want to do with that data once you've captured it and there's a purpose for it, then let's do it. But if at the end of the day you just want to say, I've put X number of dollars into Google Ads, what has that got me? Then we don't need to go so granular into that. So yeah, I always try to make it as simple as possible is always my thought.
Yes.
I agree with that. I think, you know, do you want to pull the data because somebody told you you should, or do you actually intend to report on it in a repeating way every month at a minimum? Is it worth the dollars investing in your time and money to create this? Are you going to look at it regularly or not?
Yes, that's the question. Exactly.
I really appreciate this, Sarah. You went into so much with UTMs and the well beyond the Pardot connector into, you know, GA4. So exciting. Definitely did not know all of this stuff about GA4, and I'm super excited that you know so much about Pardot and Google Analytics. They're usually so very different. So it's wonderful.
Yeah, I always wonder if I'm going too in depth or if what I'm saying makes sense. So
I think it was great. I think, honestly, I think we all need time to digest things. We'll probably have you back in the future for maybe a repeat, or maybe we can get some more questions or something like that. It's wonderful. Really great detailed slides. Really appreciate it all. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sarah. We'll talk to you soon.
Yep. Thanks, guys.
All right. Bye, everybody. Have a good night.
Bye.